Have you ever had an experience where someone that you found attractive, someone that you think is really interesting, you might have a strong sexual connection to, when they tell you that they are attracted to you, you actually start feeling disgusted and revolted by them, and you really switch off from them. And this might happen particularly around someone saying to you, I love you, and it feels really awful inside. It doesn't feel right. Now, this unfortunately is something that's very common if you have a fearful avoidant attachment. I'm going to really be discussing this today and discussing where it comes from and also what to do about it. And fundamentally, what's happening is you have a sense of, I'm unlovable. So if you love me, there must be something wrong with you. Okay, so what's happening to you is that you do not trust love because internally you have that sense of, yes, I can't value myself. I can't love myself. I'm not okay. So if someone else thinks you're okay, automatically you think, yes, they're not okay. There's something wrong with them. And this is really coming from what we call an introject. I'm going to be discussing an introject. It's not just one, actually, I'll be discussing quite a few of them. And then I'm going to be discussing what you can do if you resonate with what I'm going to be talking about today. So introjections, or having an introject, what this means is that in some way when you were a little child, someone has said something to you that is unkind, that might be cruel. And unfortunately, what's happened to you because you're just a child is that you absorb what they've said. Not only do you absorb it, but it feels like it becomes part of your identity. It feels like it's truly you. So it feels like you've been seen by someone truly, and that then becomes part of how you see yourself. So later on in life, when you're an adult, if someone questions that introject and says that it's not the way that you are, you can feel very confused and you might feel that you want to reject what the person has said. So a kind of practical example of this would be if someone said to me, for example, when I was a child, Christine, you are really stupid. You're a stupid kid. And I would believe that and I would take that on. And being stupid would become part of my identity. And then later on in adulthood, if someone said to me, Christine, I don't think you are stupid. I really don't think that's true. What would happen internally to me is I would think to myself, well, I know I'm stupid. I know that that's true about me. So the fact that you think I'm not stupid, that must mean that you're stupid. There's something wrong with you if you can't see that I'm stupid. So what's happening to you is that you're only really resonating with things that feel negative. So if someone, for example, said to me as an adult, yeah, I think you're really stupid, I would agree with that. I would think, yes, that's right. They can see me accurately because that's how I feel about myself. So it's very difficult if you have introjections, if you have the introjects, to really kind of accept positive things from other people. So if you're resonating with what I'm saying here, it's likely that this would be showing up in your therapy or in your counselling, in your one-to-one sessions. Because if a therapist says something kind to you, considerate, thoughtful, you will dismiss it. And often you will dismiss your therapist when you do this. You'll think, my therapist is so stupid. They don't see me, they don't know me, they don't understand me. So if you're kind of aware of that, this can be very helpful to kind of start working with the introject. There's a couple of things to kind of be aware of that will kind of help you sort of understand what I'm doing in sessions and where the introject is kind of really kind of enlivened when it's really active. So one thing to be aware of in sessions is if a therapist is sort of saying something to you and it's, you know, it's a logical thing, it's a sensible thing, you can evidence base it, but you reject it and you reject it out of hand and you have an emotional reaction to it, as in, no, this is not accurate. One thing that I see often with clients is if I compliment them on their competency, for example, if they've done something at work and I say, well, that sounds like you did a really good job there. When someone has introjected that they are worthless, they will say to me, no, actually, it wasn't that great. They will say things like, yes, yeah, it sounds like it was good, but actually it wasn't, etc., etc., etc. And you'll see the structure of the way that someone says no. And usually what happens is they'll be saying yes, but. So be aware that if you get into a game, and this is a game that we call it's transactional analysis game, and it's called yes, but. And what that means is that you are refuting everything that the therapist or the counselor is saying to you. There's always another reason. There's always another way for you to kind of say, actually, you're not right. You're not right. So if you catch yourself playing yes, but, if you're really refuting the things that the therapist is saying to you, have a pause around that. Now, potentially it could be that the therapist is misreading you. Obviously, that can happen. But yes, but is usually about something is being touched here that I'm uncomfortable with being touched. So I want to avoid it. I want to escape from it. I don't actually really want to kind of look at what's going on. And this is again a sign that there's an introject there, that something is kind of internalized. You've had a sense from childhood of this is my identity. So don't question my identity. Don't question this emotional reality that I have. And logic cannot penetrate an introject. So if I'm working with a client and my logic just doesn't work with them, and I pride myself on being as logical as I possibly can be, so I'm doing my best to be logical and to kind of help a client make sense of what's going on. But if I find that the logic just isn't going to make sense and isn't working for the client, then that's usually a sign that there's an introject. Another thing to look for is if you're in relationship with someone and your partner says things like, I don't know what you need. I don't know what you want, because I offer you one thing and that's what you've said that you want. And then a moment later, you're saying you want something different. It never feels that it's landing for you. So if you get that feedback from a partner, that's very useful, because they're probably pointing to something that doesn't make logical sense, that's some kind of emotional feeling from childhood that actually you can't, as I said, you can't penetrate with logic. So have a pause around those things. And one of the things I find with clients when we're looking at introjects is they may say things that don't actually make sense. For example, a client might say to me, I really want you to understand me, but I don't want you to understand me. And you think, gosh, that's really fascinating to hear that. I want you to see me, but I don't want you to see me. And people won't notice necessarily when they're saying this that it would then be impossible to work with that, because the introject can make it impossible to work with a thing. I can't see and not see a person. I can't understand and not understand a person. But that's what's happening. This is the protectiveness that you have very often around introjects. Now, the reason that you are protecting, I should say, the introject is very, very interesting. It's because it feels like it's part of your identity. It feels like it's really, really you. And it is confusing for you as well, because it's not fully who you are. It's been introjected from somebody else. This is where a lot of the confusion is. So you have confusion around your identity because you've trusted that person or you've taken on what that person has said, but it's not actually who you are. This is why it's often it's I don't know how to describe this for you. It can be painful to have introjects. You can feel like you're suffering, and in many ways you are, because you've taken on an identity that's not fully your own. And there's a sense of kind of, how can I be authentic? How can I actually get to who I am? Because this thing in the way of this doesn't feel real and true on one level, and yet you're defending it. You are making sure that other people can't challenge it. So if this is resonating for you, there's a couple of ways that you can start to work with the introject. First of all, as I said, figuring out in your therapy sessions what you're doing so you can recognize that you have those introjects. And then if you can, now this isn't always possible, but if you can work out, where did it come from? Do I remember when someone said something uncomfortable to me or hurtful to me? If you remember those instances, then you can go back to those times and talk to your therapist about it and really grieve that you've taken on someone else's reality. Now, it's not always possible to do that, unfortunately, because some of these introjects, they're from kind of pre-verbal times. They're really, really early. So if you find that you can't get all of them, that there's some things, there's some beliefs that feel that they're part of you and you can't release them, even if they don't make rational sense, then I find that working with Gestalt can be very helpful for this. It's not for everyone, okay? Not everyone loves Gestalt. I really, really enjoy it. So have a think before you do these exercises. I really like them because you can start to kind of work symbolically with them. So the first thing that I suggest to clients is the two-chair exercise. And what you do with the two-chair exercise is that you have you in a chair and then you have another chair and you're kind of the two chairs are facing each other. And on the second chair, you can put a symbol of the person who originally gave you the introject. And it can be that you just put a cushion there or you put a picture of the person. And then what you do is you start talking to the person who gave you the introject, and you can say whatever you want. And there are different ways to do this. Check when you're working with your therapist if they have any ideas about how you can do this as well. What I like to do with clients. Oh, I need a drink. I'll just be a second. I've been talking a lot today. Um, so what I suggest with clients is they tell the person how much pain they've been in because they're carrying this introject. So I will say things like, why don't you say to the introject or the person who's given it to you, this is really painful. I've been carrying this and it's not mine. This is not to do with me. I can't believe that you gave me something so horrible to have to carry. I felt stupid my whole life because of what happened here, or I felt unattractive my whole life, or I felt that I don't deserve love, that I am unlovable. I've been carrying this. And then what you can do is that you can switch chairs. So you become the person who gave you the introject. And it's very interesting then to speak as the person who gave the introject back to you. Now, you can say whatever you want here as well. It might be that in the discussion, what would be helpful is for the person to take responsibility and say, I am really sorry that I did that to you. I was in a bad mood. I was angry. I wanted to hurt you. I didn't realize that it would hurt you quite as much as it has. And I am really, really sorry that you've had to hold this and take this and carry this as part of who you are. I did not mean that to happen. Or you might want to do something different and just rage at them, get really angry and frustrated and hurt. And they might be defensive. And you might feel that you're trying to kind of convince someone that all sorts of things can happen in the two-chair discussion. It's very, very interesting. So the most important thing when you're doing two-chair really is that you have the support of your therapist. So wherever the discussion goes, you can feel safe because you've got someone who is the container for you and taking care of it. And they can become very interesting, I find. And you can have an argument. You can find that the person who originally gave you the introject actually realizes that they've had the introject from somebody else and they're just passing it on. So lots and lots of things can come out of those discussions. And one thing to do is if you're listening to me thinking, if you're listening to me describe this and thinking, my goodness, that sounds a bit overwhelming, you can script it as well. You can script this before you go through it so that you get the outcome that feels comfortable and best for you. And it's about expressing, I don't want this introject anymore. I've been given this by somebody else and I'm not comfortable with this. And the other thing to do, if you would like to do this, again, don't feel that you have to, is to work somatically. So if you think about where the introject is in your body. Now, some people love to work this way, other people don't. It's always a choice. But if you do like to work this way, kind of figuring out where the introject is, that sense of, you might have a kind of sense of collapse, particularly around any sense of kind of low self-esteem. You might feel that I'm worthless, that I have no preciousness, I have no agency, I have no power because of the introject. So if you can feel where it is in the body and symbolically pull it out and think to yourself, okay, this is not mine, and you can throw it away. There's a lot of power in being able to do that and kind of getting rid of the introject. Because the thing is, if someone has given you an introject, if someone has kind of forced you to have something, you can reject it. You can get it out. And working in that way sometimes really, really helps. It can feel really good. And you can also write down all the things that someone has said to you and burn it. That's a lovely, lovely way of kind of saying, right, I'm done. You can rip up the paper and you don't care about these things anymore. I'm not going to believe these things anymore. These things are absolute rubbish, and burn them and let go of them. So kind of working in this way can be a real sort of sense of freedom, of not just the kind of the sadness and the grief. And grief work is fantastic. I mean, it's a big part of what I do with clients, but also there can be this sense of kind of the physical release that you get from the Gestalt work that can feel very, very good, can feel kind of exciting actually to work that way. So I hope that makes sense of introjection. And also, as I've said, it can be very connected to having a fearful avoidant attachment. There's a lack of trust in self and a lack of trust in the other person when you have a fearful avoidant attachment. And this is absolutely what's happening when you have an introject. So when someone tells you that they love you, as I was saying at the beginning, there's a real sense of like, I don't trust that, I can't trust that. And unfortunately, you also have that sense of, I can't trust my own thinking, I can't trust another person's thinking. And when you do these exercises, when you place the introject back where it belonged with another person, you have more of a sense of your natural intuition, and you have more of a sense of trust in yourself, actually, which is a really wonderful thing. Okay, I think that's everything that I have today. Thank you so much for watching this.